If there's a dangerous situation ahead, how do you face it? We all have different ways of facing it, don't we? And one of my favourite quotes on facing danger is one from Blackadder. It says, "I laugh at danger and I drop ice cubes down the vest of fear." I love that quote. It makes me laugh normally, but it came up on my Facebook memories the other day, and whereas in previous years I would have shared it because it makes me laugh, today, as we face many real dangers, I felt I couldn't laugh at the face of danger anymore. How do you face danger? Some of you may have been in more dangerous situations than I've ever been, because my life has been relatively comfortable. Some of you have faced the dangers of war, of fear for your lives, of job insecurity, of loss, of beginning a new life in an unknown place. And you will all have reacted and faced it in different ways. There are many ways in which we can face danger. We can face it head on. We can fight back, destroying the danger in front. We can challenge the danger ahead and acknowledge it as a problem and find a way to get through it. We can accept the danger. We can leave it behind. We can take action against danger and turn the situation around. We can face it with hope, knowing that one day it will be over. We can face it with faith that God will get us through. In the midst of danger, however we face it, to face it with faith will enable us to overcome the fear of what is ahead. As we come to the next part of the story of the journey to the promised land, as told through the faith passage in Hebrews 11, we see a number of characters face danger in different ways, but always with faith. And it's that faith in God and in his promises that enables us to face what is ahead. The power behind us is always greater than what is in front of us. So today we're looking at Hebrews chapter 11 verses 23 to 31, which says this. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born, because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he'd grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith he left Egypt, because he was looking ahead By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and the application of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. By faith the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land, but when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. By faith the walls of Jericho fell, after the army had marched around them for 7 days. By faith the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. So there's a whole load of people in that passage, some named and some not, and it tells you about the huge part of the Israelites' journey to the promised land, running fast from the moment Moses was born in Egypt to him being taken in by Pharaoh's daughter, to him rejecting the cushy life he's been brought up in, to him leading the Israelites out of Egypt, to the capture of Jericho, not by Moses but by Joshua, because Moses died before being able to get anywhere near, to Rahab, one of a few named women in the Old Testament who helped the spies to capture the city. It's a story of decades of danger, of escape to battle, of endings and a search for beginnings, where the promises of God are still not fulfilled. The writer to the Hebrews shows us here through the lives of these characters how we can face danger with faith in different circumstances, and how we face it might be different depending on who we are and what is happening at the time. And it all starts with Moses' parents in verse 23. By faith they hid Moses for 3 months after he was born. In Exodus chapter 1, we see the new king of Egypt getting panicky about the growth of the Israelite slave population, and he fears for the future of his kingdom, and he's scared there will be an uprising. So he orders that any boy born to an Israelite be killed to stop the population explosion and keep him and his nation safe. But one couple from the tribe of Levi, Amram and Jochebed, who already had at least a daughter, Miriam, and a son, Aaron, did not obey that decree, and instead of letting the Egyptian authorities throw their new son, Moses, in the Nile to drown, they lay him in a basket and hid him amongst the bulrushes. Amongst the danger, they had faith to protect their new child from the danger he faced. They knew he had the potential to become something great, but they had to protect him until that moment happened. The fact that Moses lived at all was as a result of an act of faith. Moses' parents put their own lives at risk in the hope that Moses would survive. We don't know how our actions will affect others, but Amram and Jochebed's actions contributed to a change of direction for a whole nation trapped in slavery. For them, their decision to save Moses put their lives in danger, but it saved the lives of many more. Don't underestimate the impact of a decision you make now as you step out in faith. Moses' parents had the faith to face danger, and in protecting their son, they saved a nation. Have the faith to face danger. You never know what your actions might achieve in the future. And so we come to Moses, and we know a lot about Moses, don't we? He was the one who led the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt after a series of plagues, led them across the Red Sea, was given the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai, led the wandering in the wilderness, and yet didn't make it to the Promised Land. He's understandably held up as a great man of faith. And in this passage in Hebrews, there are 2 reasons I'm going to pick up why that is. Firstly, he had the faith to face danger by choosing a more dangerous path. Moses wouldn't have been able to do what he did if he hadn't given up his life in the palace. His life in the palace was socially, materially and physically advantageous. Yet he chose to give up all this for the ways of God. He gave up earthly glory so that he could rescue his people from slavery. It would have been easier for him to stay in the place that he was in. Moses was one of the greatest Egyptian generals, but he never forgot his origins, and one day he had to choose to ally himself with the Israelites and embrace a different kind of future. One of the challenge for many of those who are already privileged in any justice movement is that to enable liberation means giving up something of self. We've seen it over history, and one of the struggles that the Black Lives Matter movement is encountering day after day is that we come up against this defensiveness of those who already have privilege and status is, I believe, down to this, that to bring justice, we all need to change. And we want justice to come, but we don't always necessarily want to change. We need to lay down our own self to enable others to be lifted up to their rightful place. For many, that is a struggle and involves great personal change, self-searching and sacrifice. For Moses, he had to lay down his right to lead in the palaces, to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. For us, we need to lay down what we might perceive as our rights, so that there have been things that have normalised oppression and injustice, so that others may receive their rights. This is what Christ did, isn't it? He laid down his life to make things right. He laid down his life so that we might live. And if we are to follow in his way, we, like Moses, must be prepared to lay down our privileges to lift up the oppressed. Have the faith to lay down so that others may be lifted up. And the second point of faith for Moses is that Moses had the faith to persevere, even though at times it felt like he was fighting a losing battle. 7 plagues he went through, and even when the Pharaoh gave in, he changed his mind again. And he had to live through those plagues. He kept going though, he kept fighting, he kept presenting the case for liberation, and eventually they were free. They didn't get to a safe place straight away, but on a journey to safety. He never gave up, he never stopped trusting in God's promises. As he faced that awful night when the angel of death came upon the firstborn in Egypt, he faced it with an absolute dependence on God, that this night of liberation would be commemorated for many years to come, as they would be free from this day. It says that in Exodus 12, that whole story about Passover and how it was going to continue on. Moses was a man who had the faith that God would follow through on his promises and would give people the strength to see them through. He doesn't leave us on our own to work for liberation and restoration. He is always here. He is always with us. It might seem that in some of the issues we're encountering at the moment, in the injustices we're standing up against, that we're not making a difference, that we are not able to get anywhere. We might imagine that we've not even moved forward anywhere at all in the fight against racism. But we must persevere, because a day will come when God's justice will reign. We might imagine that as the economic effects of the coronavirus lockdown impact our world, our nation in ways that leave those who have least with more hardship than they've ever felt before, that we haven't got anywhere in our campaign to make poverty history. But what this story tells us is that God's justice will reign. Liberation will come. Have the faith to persevere. And the final thing we can learn from this passage is that even when we are not here anymore, our legacy lives on. Abraham headed to the promised land but never got there. Jacob headed to the promised land and he never got there either. Joseph headed to the promised land and ended up in Egypt, and the nation ended up in slavery, and he never got there. Generations later, Moses headed to the promised land, but he never got there. However, that doesn't make their contributions insignificant, because in the final few verses in this passage we see that after those great leaders, other leaders carried on the legacy. The people followed Moses, trusting their safety across the Red Sea. Joshua led the battle of Jericho, following in his mentor's example, knowing that despite their weaknesses, with God's strength, they could do anything. And Rahab, she was taken by their story as they spied on the land, and she was changed by that encounter that meant her life alongside the Israelites was also liberated. We never know what difference we might make, but we need to have faith to stand up and be counted. Stand up and face danger, despite our weakness, because the power behind us is much greater than the power that we face. That day, when Moses' parents put him in the bulrushes to save his life, changed the course of the Israelites' history, and they were liberated. That day, when Rosa Parks refused to move on the bus, her one act of defiance changed the course of segregation in the US. That day, when the women at the Ford plant in Dagenham stood up for the rights of all to have equal pay, was the first step to creating an equal pay act. That day, when the first person sent a petition to Bristol Council to get the statue of Colston removed, that was one of the first steps towards the acknowledgement of the UK's culpability in the oppression of many in the name of progress. All of those things, they have not led to a day where justice for all is done yet, but they have been significant moments on the journey. Small moments, some of them, but significant. And as we face danger, our faith motivates us to keep pushing, keep changing, keep laying aside, keep being in the grip in the system that challenges the status quo. And change will come. Freedom will come. You know how I know? Because that day, when Jesus was put on the cross in our place, and he died for the sake of humankind, facing scourging and shame and a terrible death, things changed forever. Victory in all of these things was won. Love has won. Evil has been defeated, and justice reigns. And as Christians, we believe that no one who takes the side of God can ever ultimately be on the losing side, because he has the victory. Take inspiration from the faith of our ancestors and have the courage to face the uncertainties and the danger of the future fully dependent on God.